Hello learners. Today we are going to be talking about Mary Wollstonecraft, and I'm sure all of you have heard of her. She is a leading feminist, and she's the person who kind of starts off in terms of the theorization of what we understand today as feminism. Why I want to talk about the making of Mary Wollstonecraft? Because it is important to know how does she make that progress from being who she was to the person who she became and the reason why she wrote what she did. So let us look at the beginning of the creation of the feminist Mary Wollstonecraft. The dates of Wollstonecraft are 1759 to 1797. You see, this is the 18th century we are talking about, and I have a picture of hers which you can see. So Mary began thinking, writing, ideating quite soon in her life, and we're going to come to that shortly. Now I have a few quotes here which I want to share, and probably when you read them, you're going to be understanding what she thought and why she wrote the way she did. So she writes, and I quote, "I do not wish for women to have power over men, but over themselves. My dreams were all my own. I accounted for them to nobody. They were my refuge when annoyed, my dearest pleasure when free." Another quote, "My own sex, I hope, will excuse me if I treat them like radical creatures, rational creatures, instead of flattering their fascinating graces and viewing them as if they were in a state of perpetual childhood, unable to stand alone." She writes this in the Vindication of the Rights of Women, which came out in 1792. Now, why am I sharing these two quotes with you? The first thing, there is a lot of misconception when people feel that feminists are male bashers. As early as the 18th century, Mary Wollstonecraft is telling you that it's not about women wanting to have power over men, not that at all, but over themselves. And what does that mean? It simply means that women who have a vision, who have a right to choose, to decide, to move as they wish to. So the sole plea that is being made here is that of women who seek and understand and are able to create and chart out their own path. And that's what matters. The second quote which I've shared, there is this tendency of treating women as infants, as if they don't understand. Decisions for them need to be made. They need to be told what to do. They need to be given their freedom. And what Mary Wollstonecraft is saying, that people of her sex, as in women, are very definitely not infants. They're not only about fascinating graces and, about their looks. They're about their brains, they're about their person. They're not about a perpetual childhood, which is never ending. They are about who they are, decision makers, people who can choose, people who can ideate, and people who can move as per what they wish for themselves. And that, young learners, is what I perceive as, the essence of feminism, so to say. So who was Mary Wollstonecraft? She was an English writer, she was a philosopher, and she was an advocate of women's rights. She was known for her fairly bohemian lifestyle, and she gained fame much later, not in the times when she lived, but much later in the 20th century. And in today's day and age, she is considered to be one of the earliest voices of feminist writing and philosophy. Mary Wollstonecraft has been known for having a fairly unconventional lifestyle, and it was felt that she lived much ahead of her times. She thought, she ideated, and she behaved like a woman who lived much ahead of her times. So in her lifetime and in the period in which she lived and operated, people had difficulties slotting her, placing her, understanding her. But later on, particularly with women coming into their own, understanding what Wollstonecraft was talking about. She's hailed as one of the earliest feminists that we have. So I'll share with you her biographical details. She was born on 27th of April, 1759. And then she was the second of 7 children of Elizabeth Dixon and Edward John Wollstonecraft. Now, she had a traumatic childhood. Her father was a wastrel. He was a squanderer. He spent the family money, and very soon everyone was slated to lose their inheritance because the father had managed to drink away all the money. He was abusive, he was ruthless, and he was given to severe drunken rages. And unfortunately for Mary and her siblings, it is the mother who faced these terrifying drunken rages of her father. Very soon, Wollstonecraft started playing mother to both her mother and her sisters, Eliza and Everina. There were several occasions when she used to be sleeping outside her mother's door because she felt that her mother needed protection. Much later, her sister, Eliza, was going through severe postpartum depression, and at that point of time, people did not understand what postpartum depression was. People did not understand that once a woman has gone through childbirth, there is a phase when she faces enormous amount of depression, in spite of the fact that she has a bonny, healthy child in her arms. This was something that people did not understand. Eliza was having a very tough time being a mother, being a wife. And at that point of time, Wollstonecraft advised her to leave her husband and her infant child. And this was as early as 1748. And obviously, this did not go down particularly well with the society. The sisters, the family particularly, they faced severe social ostracization. The family thought, people judged them, and particularly Mary Wollstonecraft, because she was like a rock to her sister, her mother, and she ensured that her sister could have a life outside of her marriage, something unheard of at that point of time. But like I said, the flack that she faced because of that was enormous. One of the tenets of feminism that we always talk about is sisterhood. More often than not, women are derided. You would have all heard of these things, that women run each other down, a woman is a woman's worst enemy, and so on and so forth. But believe you me, the sisterhood, when women come together in thought, in action, in ideas, when they ideate together, beautiful things are born. And when Wollstonecraft was writing and ideating, she hadn't thought of the word sisterhood. It did not exist in the way we understand it today. But it was that sisterhood that she had which took her ahead in life. And she had these 2 extremely special friendships which allowed her a breather from her domestic front. So I've already talked about the severity that she faced in her domestic spaces. And outside of her domestic space, there were 2 extremely beautiful relationships which sustained her. So one was with Jane Arden Gardiner, and Jane's dates are 1758 to 1840. She was a British schoolmistress and a grammarian, and she was one of the earliest friends of Mary Wollstonecraft. So Mary was fascinated by the Arden household and their love for letters and learning. This was something that she did not see in her own household. Jane's father was someone who had a library, who spoke, who ideated, who wrote. And Mary benefited enormously from just listening to him and breathing in that aura of learning, of appreciating knowledge, something that she missed in her own space. So she wrote extremely emotional letters to Jane Arden, laying bare her state of mind and the need for Jane's companionship. And I quote Mary, where she says, "I have formed romantic notions of friendship. I am a little singular in my thoughts of love and friendship. I must have the first place or none." Now, when we read this, this almost seems like a lover's note to another lover, pretty much saying that I need to be the primary person in your life. I cannot share you with anyone else. Now, several interpretations can be made, but most importantly, how I read it is this is about two women who united for the love of knowledge, for the love of exploring the world. And in Mary Wollstonecraft, it was a world away from that of her own, and therefore it was special. It was something that she completely cherished. The second relationship, and this was also extremely special, and this was even deeper than the one that she shared with Jane. This was with Frances Blood. She was called Fanny Blood, and her dates were 1758 to 1785. Fanny was an illustrator and an educator, and Mary wasn't close only to Fanny. She was also very close to her brother, George Blood, and there are some portraits of the three of them together. They all became extremely good friends, and together, one of the shared interests that all of them had was for starting school for girls. So they started a second school for girls. They'd already started one before, which had failed, unfortunately. Now this was an effort to start another school for girls. Later in life, Mary called her own daughter, Fanny Imlay, and this was after a friend, Fanny. Frances unfortunately died of childbirth, forcing Mary into severe depression. So remember, we are talking at a time when pregnancy, carrying a child full term, delivering a child safely had not quite become the norm. Many women lost their lives during childbirth. And unfortunately for Mary, her best friend, Frances or Fanny, she died of childbirth. And Mary has written about it extensively because she wrote about her life, and it was her life which made her into the feminist that she was. It was her lived experiences. So she wrote Mary, a fiction, in 1788, and that was inspired by her friend Frances. Again, Mary had dreamt of living with Blood all her life. She had wanted to live with Frances all her life, loving and supporting her friend to the very last. But this utopic dream of two women carving out a life for themselves was something that only remained in the realm of utopia. It did not become or could not become a reality because the times were not ripe for such a thing. By then, Mary was quite disenchanted at home, and she left her home in 1778 to become a lady's companion to one Sarah Dawson. And we know that the time that she spent as a lady's companion with this esoteric woman who gave her a lot of grief, Mary was forced to come back when her mother fell very grievously ill in 1780. She had to come back to take care of her mother. And the time that she spent as a lady's companion made her realize how difficult it was for a woman with some learning who wanted to carve out a life for herself. How she was forced to debase herself, how she was forced to act as per another person's whims and fancies, and that broke her spirit. For somebody who was of free thinking, somebody who could write, who could think, who could ideate, who dreamt of a utopic world, here she was being, the society was forcing her back into the box which the society thought women need to belong to. This experience of hers at the Dawson household led to her writing of Thoughts on Education of Daughters. Now that was very, very important to her. Now remember, the only way a woman can be free, and when I talk about freedom, I talk about mental freedom, I talk about an understanding. How do you get an understanding? How do you form an opinion? Only when you have education, and education opens doors for you. So as early as 1787, she had written Thoughts on the Education of Daughters. So educate yourself and educate your daughters, because that's the only way the society can move forward. So after Fanny Blood's death, Wollstonecraft sought out yet another position as a governess to the daughters of Anglo-Irish Kingsborough family. Now, we keep wondering, why does she need to do this? Why does she need to find a sort of vocation for herself at a time when women were not seen to be workers per se? The job market was not created for women. So the only job that an educated woman could get who didn't have substantive money to do nothing, or the luxury to do nothing, she could only be a governess. And that's the job that Wollstonecraft opts for at the Kingsborough family. And here too, it wasn't particularly very easy for her, because you have to remember that there was a certain skill set, there was a certain amount of erudition, there was a certain amount of understanding of the world that Mary had, which she brought with her, which did not sort of coincide with the local thinking at that point of time. So more often than not, she was at odds with what the world thought and what she was thinking. And it was very difficult for her to explain to the people that she was interacting with that the world that she had, that she had crafted, that she wanted, was not exactly utopic and playing out in her mind. It's a world that could very well be a reality if people chose to think differently. So what we had a problem with at that point of time was people's understanding of what Mary and her ideas stood for. And one also has to understand that the term feminism, as we understand it today, was obviously not there. There was no term called feminism. There was no requirement felt by the society to give a special kind of understanding which was supposed to be devoted to women. So the society did not feel the necessity at all. Now the woman's job was pretty much cut out. She was supposed to look beautiful, she was supposed to take care of her looks, and then eventually she was supposed to be a mother. And once she had become a mother, she had pretty much fulfilled whatever it is that she was, that she had been born for. And that pretty much seemed to be what a woman's role in the society was. And here was Mary talking about education, about ideation, about understanding your own world, about striking out for yourself, about wanting a world where a woman could think, ideate, write, things which were completely unheard of at that point of time. And that put her in a bit of a spot. So when she interacted with the lady of the house, there was a natural antipathy. The lady of the house did not take very well to Mary at all. Though interestingly, her wards, the children whom she was teaching, they seemed to gravitate towards her. They seemed to take a liking for Mary. And for the first time, probably, Mary actually had a sense of being understood, even if it was by younger children. Not exactly the people that she was talking to, but at least these children seemed to understand what it is that Mary was talking about. And they took a great deal of fascination to her. And they thought of her as their inspiration. Now, again, the experiences that she had at the Kingsborough house led her to write a children's book, Original Stories from Real Life. Now, it was important for Mary to recreate everything that she negotiated with. And look at the name also that she has. These are real life stories, original stories, because she has been one of the persons who was involved in the dramatization of these stories. She was very much there. And these were stories that were plucked from real life situations, particularly the Kingsborough family and the children's sort of interaction with their governess. And when you read the book, this is in fact the only book that she has devoted to children. But all of us understand that children's books are not exactly only children's books. They give us a look into the world of the author and the world that the author operated in. The world in which Mary Wollstonecraft operated in was a very, very, it was not a particularly fair world to women. It was skewed against women in a dreadful manner. And Mary was privy to the injustices that she saw and that she had to negotiate with. Being a very sensitive person, being somebody who could understand, think, ideate, she reacts much more than any other person would. And that is what finds its way into the kind of writing that she does. When Mary takes up writing, she ideates about a few things. One being the vocation for women. She feels cheated that women, even today, in the times that she lived and she wrote, did not write. Women were not supposed to be writers. They did not pick up a pen, they did not write. We have so many examples of women having used pseudonyms in order to get published, and they came much later. So within the societal situation, there was no concept of a vocation for women. So women were not supposed to have a vocation, women were not supposed to have any kind of a job, any kind of an engagement outside of their households. And this is something that worried, annoyed, and upset Mary enormously. She felt that women needed to come out, break out of these shackles, because in terms of the brain, or in terms of being able to think, it's not as if the male sex had been blessed any more than the female sex. Why then was it considered that a woman was not capable of making decisions for herself, or thinking for herself, or writing for herself? So then finally she makes a fairly radical choice, and that radical choice was that she was going to become a writer. Now you have to understand that at the point when she thinks that she can become a writer, no woman has written anything. No woman had even considered writing anything, because reading and writing was supposed to be outside of the purview of the woman's existence. She could read for pleasure. Mostly she could read and find out how to become a good wife and a good mother. That is how much reading a woman was supposed to do. If a governess came to teach a woman, what was she supposed to be teaching a girl? She was supposed to be teaching her how to do good sewing, how to keep a good household, how to dress up well, how to speak well, how to hold her gait very well, how to carry her, how to carry herself in society. And what was she being geared up for? So when she would be shown in the society, when she would come out during a ball, in order to be able to find a man who was admiring of her looks, and therefore a marriage would happen. We are all aware how the marriages would happen. There would be a dowry situation. How much was the woman worth? Which would eventually lead to the families deciding that they would want to unite. After the unison, she was required to produce the heir to be, and that was pretty much the trajectory that she was supposed to follow. Technically, the marriage would be of her choice, but those of you who've read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which was hugely influenced by Mary Wollstonecraft's writing, you would know how the marriage market worked in terms of the money, in terms of the dowry, in terms of the entailments, who was going to inherit how much, and so on and so forth. So here you had this woman who finally makes up her mind, and she says that she wants to be a writer. And she befriended, now the good thing that happened at that point of time was that she befriended a publisher called Joseph Johnson, and his dates were 1738 to 1809. And he was a firebrand publisher who had published some of the most radical people of the times. and Mary became his friend, and he was radical enough to want to publish Mary. So the writers, and you would have heard of many of them, they were the most radical set of people at that point of time. So Thomas Godwin, Thomas Malthus, Erasmus Darwin, Joel Barlow, and the feminist economist Priscilla Wakefield. Now, these were some of the most radical thinkers of the British society at that point of time, who Joseph Johnson was happy to publish. Mary benefited from the fact that she had Joseph for a friend, and Joseph was willing to publish her. Joseph did not stop with just these names who went on to become, thinkers of the world in later days. He published religious dissenters like Joseph Priestley, Gilbert Wakefield, George Walker, and Johnson was publishing all of them. So Mary, through sheer good luck, became Joseph Johnson's friend, and that is where she writes to her sisters, and she proclaims that a new genus, something new, something brand new is going to happen. A woman is going to be writing, and that's how the first book is conceived and is written. So I talked earlier about Wollstonecraft's rather bohemian lifestyle. So she had a very strong relationship with the noted painter Henry Fuseli, and he was a married man. She was enamored by what she wrote, and I quote, "The grandeur of his soul, that quickness of comprehension and lovely sympathy." And she'd even proposed to Henry and his wife that she would live with them and share a platonic relationship where she would live with Henry and his wife and continue with the relationship. But Henry's wife was completely shocked and refused to allow Mary to live with Henry and herself. And she was so riddled by anxiety and fear of ridicule. This forced her eventually to move to France. And this broadened, and this I will discuss at length later, this broadened her revolutionary spirit. She went to take part in the revolutionary movement, and then she's written about it in The Vindication of the Rights of Men, which comes out in 1790. So I end with the picture that you see before you. This is from the edition of Original Stories of Real Life, and this was engraved by none other than William Blake, the noted poet. So the reason why we talked about Mary Wollstonecraft and her maturing into this feminist writer, because a lot of her lived experiences went on to create who she became. And the fact that she was born into the bourgeoisie family, but they did not manage to keep their money, and she was forced to go on into the world and work. So the reason why I talk about Mary's life, her influences, her lovers, was because that is the person that she became. The fact that she lost her money, she had to deal with her father's drunkenness, she craved for very strong relationships with her women friends, and later on even craved for a relationship with Henry Fuseli. Unfortunately, none of them worked, but all of this propelled her to become the person who she became and the writer who she became. So I hope you enjoyed looking closely at the making of the noted feminist Mary Wollstonecraft.